My name is Rebecca, and I never thought I would become the kind of woman who dreams of revenge in the quiet hours of the night. Yet here I am, telling you my story because if I don't, the anger inside me will eat me alive. My home in Charleston, South Carolina, had always been my pride. A two-story house with pale blue shutters and a wraparound porch, bought with my own hard-earned money after years of late nights at the office and weekends spent working when everyone else was laughing at beach houses on Sullivan's Island. It wasn't much compared to the estates my parents boasted about in Boston, but it was mine. Every nail and shingle paid for with sweat and persistence. That's why the betrayal cuts so deep. It happened in the house I thought represented my independence. It started with a call from the bank on a humid July morning. The agent's voice was polite but firm as she asked whether I had authorized a series of charges totaling $75,000. My first thought was that she had the wrong Rebecca. Surely, no one in their right mind could rack up that much debt overnight. But when she began listing the transactions, wedding gowns, a ballroom booking at the Plaza in New York City, floral arrangements that sounded like they belonged in a royal coronation, and a honeymoon suite styled after Italy, my stomach turned to stone. I didn't need to ask who was behind it. Only one person in my life had the audacity and lack of shame to pull such a stunt. My sister, Sophia. Sophia had always been the glittering star of the family, the one who breezed through life as though the world owed her luxury. Where I had fought for every inch of stability, Sophia floated effortlessly from one indulgence to another, shielded by charm and good looks. She wasn't cruel outright, but she had perfected the art of selfishness so completely that cruelty was unnecessary. She simply took what she wanted and let others clean up the wreckage. This time, she had taken from me my money, my credit, my very security, and she hadn't even bothered to ask. I drove up to New York the following weekend, fueled by rage and black coffee, rehearsing the words I wanted to throw at her. When I arrived at her apartment on the Upper East Side, she opened the door with a smile as though she had been expecting me to come bearing gifts. She wore a silk robe, her hair freshly done, and around her neck hung a diamond necklace so blinding it nearly mocked me. "You look stressed," she said with a casual laugh, ushering me in. "Wedding planning can be such a nightmare, can it? You really should relax." That was when I snapped. I told her everything. The bank call, the fraudulent charges, the fact that she had nearly destroyed my financial standing with her reckless theft. But instead of remorse, Sophia tilted her head and smirked, sipping her champagne like the villainess in some cheap drama. "Rebecca, it's family. You're supposed to support me. You know I'll pay you back eventually. Besides, it's not like you were using the money. What do you even spend on? Your sad little house in Charleston." The venom in her words burned me. My house wasn't sad. It was freedom. It was proof that I didn't need anyone to rescue me. And here she was, tearing it down, dismissing years of sacrifice with a flick of her perfectly manicured hand. When I told my parents, I expected at least a fraction of outrage. Instead, I was met with sighs and lectures. "Sophia just wanted her wedding to be special," my mother said, her tone dripping with forced patience. My father added, "This isn't worth tearing the family apart. Be supportive. Figure it out. Figure it out." As though I could magically conjure up $75,000 to cover my sister's delusions of grandeur. As though my financial ruin was a minor inconvenience compared to Sophia's fragile happiness. I hung up the phone with my parents and sat in my kitchen, staring at the magnolia trees swaying outside my window. I could feel my blood pulsing with fury. It wasn't just about the money. It was about being betrayed, dismissed, and abandoned all at once. That's when the decision crystallized in my mind. I wouldn't let Sophia get away with this. I wouldn't let my parents sweep it under the rug like they always did.
No.
This time there would be consequences. So, when the police called me later that week to confirm the fraudulent charges, I didn't hesitate. They asked if I knew the person responsible, and my lips curved into the coldest smile I had ever worn. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "Her name is Sophia Miller. She's my sister." As soon as I hung up, a strange calm washed over me, almost frightening in its intensity. For years I had swallowed my anger, buried beneath layers of politeness and obligation. But not this time. This time I was going to watch her empire of lies crumble. I imagined her face when the police showed up, her perfectly powdered cheeks going pale, her diamond necklace suddenly feeling heavy around her throat. For the first time in a long while, I felt in control. And yet, underneath that calm was something darker, an aggression I didn't recognize in myself. It wasn't enough that she would face legal trouble. I wanted her to feel the humiliation I had carried all my life, always standing in her shadow while our parents cheered her on. I wanted to strip away her glamour, leave her with nothing but the knowledge that she had lost to me. It was revenge, pure and unrelenting, and I fed on it like oxygen. That night, as I lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me. My house felt different, colder, sharper. No longer just a sanctuary, it had become a war room. I thought about every time Sophia had stolen something from me, a sweater, a boyfriend in high school, my parents' approval, and how I had let it slide. But she had gone too far this time. She had crossed a line she could never retreat from. I promised myself I would not just defend my life. I would rebuild it stronger, higher, and brighter, while making sure Sophia's perfect little world burned to the ground. She had turned me into her enemy, and I was no longer afraid to play that role. Revenge wasn't simply an act, it was a transformation. And as I drifted into sleep, one thought echoed in my mind like a drumbeat. Sophia, you have no idea who you just created. The weeks that followed were chaos, and I savored every second of it. For once in my life, Sophia wasn't untouchable. The police came knocking on her polished Manhattan apartment, an apartment she liked to parade on Instagram, showing off the city's skyline like she owned it. I wasn't there to witness the moment, but I imagined it vividly. Her smug face, painted with expensive makeup, freezing when the officers read her name. Her husband, Daniel, the corporate lawyer with too much arrogance and too little loyalty, probably stood in the doorway, speechless, his mouth open like a man unaccustomed to being caught off guard. The thought gave me a satisfaction I had never known before. Word spread quickly, of course. Manhattan gossip circles thrive on blood, and the fall of Sophia Miller, once the darling of society weddings and charity galas, was irresistible prey. Friends distanced themselves. Invitations disappeared. And for once, Sophia's perfect life had a crack in it, and that crack was my doing. My parents called me every day, their voices heavy with disappointment and barely concealed anger. "Rebecca," my mother scolded, "she's your sister. You don't turn family over to the police." My father added, "This isn't worth tearing the family apart. Retract your statement. Help her. Be supportive." I nearly laughed in their faces through the phone. They had no idea how many years of my life had been swallowed in Sophia's shadow, how many sacrifices I had made while she floated along, indulged, adored, and never held accountable. When I reminded them of the money, $75,000 siphoned from my life savings, they dismissed it with a casual cruelty. "You make good money, Rebecca. You'll figure it out." Figure it out. Those words burned like acid in my chest. I was always the one to figure it out. When Sophia blew through her college allowance, I was the one who covered her rent. When she wanted a dream birthday in Los Angeles, I paid for half the trip because my parents said she deserved to celebrate big. And now, when she had stolen more than most people make in a year, they wanted me to figure it out again. But I was done being their solution. I was done being the sister who sacrificed, the daughter who endured, the one who cleaned up everyone's mess. For the first time in my life, I chose me. I remember sitting in my office in Atlanta, the glass walls overlooking the skyline, sunlight catching on the steel buildings. I worked as a financial consultant, long hours, endless spreadsheets, and clients who never thanked you until you saved them from ruin. Every dollar I made was a victory, earned with sleepless nights and sheer determination. And as I sat there, sipping bitter coffee, I asked myself, why should I protect the person who gutted me financially and emotionally? Why should I care if her perfect world collapses? The answer came easily. I shouldn't. In fact, I wanted to see it happen. Revenge is a strange thing. It doesn't always explode. It simmers, waiting for the right opportunity. And the more my parents begged, the more their voices cracked with desperation, the colder I became. They had chosen their golden child, as always. I wasn't their daughter in that moment. I was the villain for daring to demand justice. Fine. Let them see me as a villain. I would wear that role with pride. Sophia, meanwhile, was unraveling. Court dates, endless legal fees, whispers of fraud that stained Daniel's reputation at his firm. It was almost poetic. I hadn't touched him, hadn't accused him of anything, and yet the stink of her downfall clung to him, infecting his carefully polished image. A corporate lawyer married to a fraudster, his colleagues didn't need proof to begin sharpening their knives. One evening, I sat on my balcony in Charleston, staring out at the magnolias, and I poured myself a glass of bourbon. I thought about Sophia pacing in her high-rise apartment, her diamond necklace suddenly worthless in the face of subpoenas and investigators. I imagined her calling Daniel, her voice breaking as she demanded he fix it, and his cold silence when he realized she was a liability. That was the beauty of revenge. It didn't require my constant hand. Once I set it in motion, the world around Sophia did the work for me. Her own greed, her carelessness, her arrogance, they were the fuel. I had only lit the match. But aggression burned hotter in me than I expected. It wasn't enough to watch her sweat in court. I wanted more. I wanted to strip away the armor she had always hidden behind, her husband, her parents, her reputation. I wanted her alone, naked in the storm of her own making, finally forced to see me not as the responsible sister, but as the woman who destroyed her. So I started digging. Daniel wasn't as clean as he pretended to be. A contact of mine in Boston, an old boyfriend who now worked in private banking, owed me a favor. With a few whispered phone calls, I learned more about Daniel's financial life than his own wife probably knew. Offshore accounts, transfers in pounds sterling to shadowy investments, debt he had hidden behind layers of legal jargon. It was delicious. I didn't expose it all at once. That would have been merciful. Instead, I fed the information carefully, strategically, into places where it would sting the most. An anonymous tip to his law firm's ethics committee. A whisper to a financial journalist I had once helped with a case. By the time Daniel realized what was happening, his name was already swirling in rumors he couldn't control. Sophia called me one night. Her voice was sharp, brittle, stripped of its usual confidence. "Are you proud of yourself?" she spat. "You've ruined everything. My marriage, my life. You've destroyed it all because you couldn't let one thing go." I listened in silence, savoring every word. When she finally went quiet, waiting for me to plead, I said only this. "No, Sophia. I didn't ruin your life. You did. I just stopped protecting you." She hung up on me, but I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of her anger, my parents' disappointment, or the world's judgment. I was free. And yet, as I set the phone down, I felt something darker bloom in my chest. I realized this wasn't just about Sophia anymore. It wasn't just about $75,000 or a wedding she didn't deserve. This was about power, about finally seizing the role I had been denied for so long. I was no longer the sister who endured. I was the storm, and I wasn't done yet. Revenge is never a single act. It is not one sharp stab in the dark, nor one moment of triumph. No, revenge is patient. It festers, sharpens, and demands more the longer it breathes. By the time Sophia had accused me of ruining her life, I realized something chilling. I wasn't finished. Watching her stumble in the wreckage of her own choices wasn't enough. I wanted her entire foundation, the fake glamour, the financial props, even the people she leaned on, to collapse beneath her feet. And Daniel was the perfect place to start. Sophia's husband had always struck me as smug, the kind of man who wore expensive suits as armor, his smile just wide enough to hide the rot underneath. He wasn't simply guilty of enabling her. He was guilty of thinking he could sneer down at me from their Manhattan penthouse, treating me as the responsible sister, the boring one, while they played king and queen of their hollow little empire. But I knew something about men like Daniel, The higher they climbed, the more cracks they left behind. All I had to do was widen them. It started with a phone call to Boston. I hadn't spoken to Mark in years, an old boyfriend from college, the kind of man who always kept his ear pressed to the ground in the banking world. Mark owed me a favor, though, and when I explained what I was looking for, he didn't hesitate. Within a week, I had documents in my inbox that painted a picture Daniel would kill to keep hidden. Offshore accounts. Shady transfers in pounds sterling to investments that had no transparency. Debts covered with clever legal jargon that would crumble under scrutiny. The man wasn't just arrogant. He was reckless. I could have dropped everything at once, but that would have been merciful. And mercy was no longer part of my vocabulary. Instead, I began feeding the information carefully, strategically, into the places where it would do the most damage. First came the anonymous email to his law firm's ethics committee. I wrote it in cold, precise language, attaching copies of transfers that no one in his position should have been authorizing. Within days, whispers started threading their way through the pristine halls of his firm. Colleagues who once clapped him on the back began watching him from the corners of their eyes. Secretaries avoided his gaze. Daniel, who had lived for his spotless reputation, now found himself drowning in suspicion. But I didn't stop there. I knew exactly how much Daniel cherished his image in the financial press. A few more anonymous leaks, a phone call to a journalist I had once saved from financial ruin during my consulting work, and suddenly his name was appearing in articles that questioned his judgment and ethical standards. By the end of the month, Daniel was no longer the rising star of his firm. He was suspended, his case under review, his pride crumbling beneath the weight of scrutiny. I didn't need to see Sophia's face to know what it looked like. Her glamorous world, once dripping in champagne, silk gowns, and diamond necklaces, had shriveled into something pathetic. Courtrooms, overdue bills, and the humiliation of being whispered about in every social circle she had once ruled. And me? I thrived. I sold my Charleston house, the one where betrayal had sunk its teeth into me, and bought a modern loft in Chicago. High above the river, with glass windows that stretched to the sky, I stood at night and looked down at the glittering city lights. For the first time in years, I felt powerful, not the quiet, dutiful power of responsibility, but the sharp, hungry kind that came with striking back. But aggression is addictive. Once you taste it, you want more. I began plotting not just how to hurt Sophia, but how to dismantle the entire illusion she had built. I wanted her stripped bare, left with nothing but the consequences of her greed and arrogance. My parents still called, pleading with me to stop this madness and think of the family. I let their calls go to voicemail. Family had never protected me. Why should I protect them now? In Chicago, I rebuilt myself with precision. My new loft was sleek, minimalist, and unapologetically expensive, every piece of furniture a symbol of what I could afford without stealing from anyone. I poured myself into work, earning more than ever, each dollar proof that I didn't need their approval to succeed. And yet, every night, when I stood by those tall windows with a glass of bourbon in hand, my mind wandered back to Sophia. I knew she was unraveling. I imagined her pacing in their apartment, shouting at Daniel, begging him to fix it, her voice shrill with panic. I imagined Daniel turning on her, his frustration boiling over as he realized that marrying Sophia had become the worst mistake of his life. That was the outcome I wanted most. Not just Sophia's downfall, but the implosion of the entire life she had built on lies and stolen money. One night, I decided to push harder. I hired a private investigator, a quiet man with no name in Chicago society, but plenty of skills. I wanted every dirty secret Sophia had, every unpaid bill, every lie told to friends, every indiscretion she thought no one knew about. When the report came back, I read it with cold delight. Affairs she had hinted at during her engagement. Loans she had begged off friends she never paid back. A trail of deceit, so long it looked less like a life and more like a ticking time bomb. With every page, my aggression sharpened. I wasn't just going to destroy Sophia's finances or reputation. I was going to erase the very illusion that had made my parents worship her and dismiss me. They had called me boring, practical, the safe one. They had crowned her the star. But when I was finished, they would see the truth. Sophia wasn't a star. She was a fraud, a parasite who lived off others until they bled dry. That thought kept me warm at night, even as the Chicago winter pressed in with icy winds off the lake. I no longer felt guilt or hesitation. Those emotions belonged to the old Rebecca, the one who bent to keep the peace, who sacrificed for a family that never gave back. The Rebecca, who now stared at the city from her loft window, was different. Stronger, colder, and more dangerous. Because once you taste revenge, you learn something frightening. It's never enough to strike once. You want to keep striking, to keep pushing, until nothing remains of the enemy you set out to destroy. Sophia thought I had ruined her life already. She had no idea. The real destruction was only beginning. Christmas in Boston was always a spectacle in my family's home. My parents prided themselves on extravagance, wreaths draped across every banister, garlands strung with golden ribbon, a tree that touched the ceiling and glittered with ornaments collected from trips across Europe. Growing up, I had once loved it, the magic of lights and music filling the cold December nights. But this year, when I walked into that house, all I saw was the hypocrisy buried beneath the sparkle. The family that had abandoned me to fend for myself now expected me to sit at their table, smile, and pretend that nothing had happened. I accepted their invitation, not because I wanted reconciliation, but because I wanted closure. Revenge, after all, is only complete when you stand face to face with the ruins of your enemy and look them in the eye. I wanted Sophia to see me not as her sister, not as the boring, responsible one, but as the force that dismantled her entire empire. When I arrived, the air was thick with forced cheer. My mother greeted me stiffly, my father barely met my eyes, and the whispers of extended relatives filled the hallways. But it was Sophia I sought. She sat near the fireplace, pale and drawn, her once perfect hair dull and brittle. The diamond necklace that used to sparkle around her neck was gone, replaced with a thin silver chain that seemed almost pitiful. Her husband, Daniel, was nowhere to be seen. The man who had once been her shield had abandoned her, leaving her to face the fallout alone. I approached slowly, savoring the moment. When she looked up at me, her eyes were full of loathing but also something else. Fear. For the first time, Sophia was afraid of me. "You ruined me," she whispered, her voice cracked and hollow, just loud enough for me to hear over the murmur of carols drifting in from outside. I leaned down, close enough that she could feel my breath, my voice cold and sharp as winter.
"No, Sophia.
You ruined yourself the moment you touched my life, my credit, and my trust. I just made sure you paid for it." Her lips trembled, but she didn't reply. For once, the girl who had always had something clever or cruel to say was silent. That silence was the sweetest gift I could have asked for. Dinner was a strained affair. The table was set with fine china, the centerpiece adorned with red roses and holly, but the air around us was toxic. My parents tried to keep up the illusion of harmony, forcing smiles and empty conversation, but I could feel the tension crackling beneath the surface. Every fork that clinked against a plate, every glass of wine poured, only amplified the reality they were all trying to deny. The family they thought was unshakable had been split wide open. I watched Sophia throughout the meal. She barely ate, pushing food around her plate, her eyes hollow. She looked like a ghost of the woman who once strutted into luxury boutiques and ordered champagne without glancing at the price. Her fall had been swift and brutal, and I had orchestrated every note of it. That knowledge warmed me more than the wine ever could. After dinner, I excused myself to the parlor, standing by the tall windows as snow began to fall outside. The city was blanketed in white, soft and silent, but inside me burned a fire that would not be quenched. My parents joined me, their expressions heavy with disappointment. "You've gone too far, Rebecca," my father said, his voice stern but weary. "Family isn't supposed to destroy each other." I turned to him, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. "Family is supposed to protect each other, Dad. Where were you when she stole $75,000 from me? Where were you when I begged you to see the truth? You didn't protect me. You protected her like you always have. Don't talk to me about family. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing. I could see the shame flicker in her eyes, but it was too late. Their words, their choices, had already carved the line between us too deep to repair. Later that night, when most of the guests had gone and only the hollow core of family remained, Sophia approached me again. Her hands trembled as she clutched a glass of water, her voice barely steady. What do you want from me, Rebecca? You've already taken everything. The wedding is ruined. Daniel's gone. My reputation is destroyed. What more do you want? I looked at her for a long moment, studying the cracks in the woman I once knew. Then I spoke, each word deliberate, sharp as glass. I don't want anything from you. I want you to live with this. I want you to wake up every morning and remember that you don't get to hurt me anymore. I want you to know that every time you try to claw your way back up, I'll be there, waiting to remind you of what you did. That's what I want. Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. No pity, no remorse. Only justice. That night, as carolers sang outside and the snow continued to fall, I realized something important. Revenge wasn't just about payback. It wasn't about destroying Sophia or even about teaching her a lesson. It was about reclaiming my own life. Every dollar I earned, every city I rebuilt myself in, every friend I chose to keep, that was my power. I wasn't the forgotten sister anymore. I wasn't the responsible one shoved to the sidelines. I was the storm that had ripped through Sophia's world and left her exposed. Standing by the window, watching the flakes drift down onto the frozen streets of Boston, I whispered the words I had waited my whole life to say. My name is Rebecca, and I am not the woman you steal from and walk away. I am the woman who burns your empire down, brick by brick, until you finally understand. Aggression is just another name for survival. And as the night wore on, I felt no regret, only the quiet, cold satisfaction of a reckoning complete.